October 30th, 1942, 2,315 hours. Eastern Mediterranean, 70 miles north of port, said Kapitän-Lieutenant Hans Dietrich von Tiesenhausen watched the massive tanker through his periscope, calculating angles, ranges, torpedo spread. U-559 had stalked this convoy for 6 hours, waiting for the perfect moment. Now, in the moonless Mediterranean night, that moment had arrived. Fire 1, Fire 2, 2G7E, electric torpedoes, weightless, silent killers, strict toward HMS Petard at 30 knots. Von Tiesenhausen never saw them hit, because at that precise instant Petard's sonar operator heard the distinctive sound of torpedo tubes flooding and screamed a warning that would change the entire course of the Atlantic War. What happened in the next 14 hours wasn't just a naval battle. It was a heist, the most consequential theft in military history. Because inside U-559's pressure hull, locked in the captain's safe, sat 3 documents that would unlock every secret Germany possessed. Documents that would allow British intelligence to read 158,000 German naval messages. Documents that would send 2,000 German submariners to their deaths over the next 18 months. And 3 British sailors, 2 of whom would die in the attempt were about to steal them. This isn't a story about breaking codes through mathematics. This is a story about breaking into a sinking submarine in total darkness, with seawater flooding in, knowing the boat could plunge to the bottom at any second, and grabbing documents, whose significance you can't possibly understand, but somehow know will matter more than your own life. Able seaman Colin Grazier was 22 years old. Lieutenant Francis Fasson was 29. NAAFI canteen assistant Tommy Brown was 16, officially too young to even be aboard a warship. But in the chaos of war, nobody had checked his papers too carefully. In 11 minutes, Fasson and Grazier would be dead, entombed inside U-559 as she plunged to the Mediterranean floor. But the documents they passed up Tommy Brown in those final desperate seconds would doom the entire German U-boat fleet, because those documents contained something the Germans believed was impossible to capture: the current weather codebook and the diagram tables for Enigma's 4-rotor naval cipher. With those documents, Bletchley Park could finally break the Atlantic U-boat communications that had been unreadable for 9 months. The blackout that had nearly cost Britain the war. This is the story of U-559's final patrol. The story of 3 sailors who died so that thousands could live. The story of how physical courage enabled mathematical genius. And the story of how one captured Enigma machine became the most valuable war prize in history, a traitor inside. The machine that would betray every German submarine in the Atlantic. The Germans spent the rest of the war wondering how British intelligence had suddenly become so effective. They never discovered the truth, that their most closely guarded secrets had been stolen from a sinking submarine by a teenager who couldn't even swim. Part 1. The Blackout, February 1st, 1942. Bletchley Park. Hut 8. The atmosphere in Hut 8 was approaching desperation. For 23 months, the codebreakers had been reading German naval Enigma traffic with increasing success. The intelligence from decrypted U-boat communications, codename Ultrahad, allowed the Admiralty to route convoys around U-boat patrol lines, saving countless merchant ships and thousands of lives. Then, on February 1st, 1942, it all stopped. Joan Clark, one of Bletchley Park's most brilliant cryptonomists, stared at the intercept in front of her with growing frustration. The German naval message was encrypted using the new Enigma machine that had just been introduced for U-boat communications. The 3-rotor Enigma that Bletchley Park had learned to crack was difficult enough. This 4-rotor variant, codenamed Shark by the codebreakers, was exponentially harder. How much harder? Commander Edward Travis had asked when the first Shark messages appeared. The 3-rotor machine has approximately 159 million possible settings, Joan explained. The 4-rotor machine has 336 million possible settings. We've just gone from a problem that's barely solvable to one that might be mathematically impossible with our current resources. Might be, Travis pressed. We need more bombs, Alan Turing interjected. The bombs were electromechanical computing machines designed to test possible Enigma settings at high speed. Many more, and even then, we need crypt's probable words or phrases we can use to narrow down the settings. And ideally, we need captured materials, codebooks, key settings, tables, anything that can give us shortcuts into the cipher. How long until we can read shark traffic? Travis asked. Turing and Clark exchanged glances. Months, Turing said carefully. Perhaps longer, perhaps never, unless we get lucky with captured materials. That blackout lasted 9 months. 9 months during which German U-boats operated with virtual impunity in the Atlantic. 9 months during which Allied convoy losses mounted catastrophically. 9 months during which Britain came perilously close to starvation. The statistics told the story. January 1942, 62 Allied ships sunk 327,357 tons. February 1942, 85 ships sunk, 476,451 tons. March 1942, 95 ships sunk, 537,980 tons. April 1942, 74 ships sunk, 431,664 tons. May 1942, 151 ships sunk, 705,050 tons. June 1942, 144 ships sunk, 700,235 tons. The tonnage lost in the first 6 months of 1942 exceeded 3 million tons. Merchant ships, tankers, cargo vessels, and the sailors who crewed them. Britain's imports dropped to dangerous levels. Food rationing intensified, oil reserves dwindled, industrial production suffered from lack of raw materials, and Bletchley Park could do nothing except intercept German messages they couldn't decrypt, knowing that somewhere in that encrypted gibberish were the positions of U-boat patrol lines, attack orders, convoy, interception coordinates, intelligence that could save lives and win the Battle of the Atlantic. If only they could read it. We're losing the war, Travis told the Hut 8 team in July 1942. Not losing it slowly, losing it now, this year, unless we break shark. The Admiralty estimates we have perhaps 6 months before convoy losses become unsustainable. We need those captured materials. We need them desperately. What Travis didn't tell them was that the Admiralty had already issued classified orders to every Royal Navy vessel in every theater. If you encounter a German U-boat, capturing it intact is a higher priority than sinking it. The risk to your own ship, the danger to your crew, those considerations are secondary. We need what's inside that submarine more than we need it on the bottom of the ocean. Part 2. The Mediterranean Hunters, October 1942, Eastern Mediterranean. HMS Petard was a P-class destroyer, lightly small, lightly armed, but fast and maneuverable. She had been assigned to the Mediterranean fleet, protecting convoys running supplies to Malta and North Africa, hunting Italian and German submarines, conducting shore bombardments, and generally doing the grinding, dangerous work that destroyers did in wartime. Her commander was Lieutenant Commander Mark Thornton, a career naval officer who had spent 18 months in the Mediterranean theater. He was experienced, competent, and known for aggressive tactics when hunting submarines. His crew was typical of wartime Royal Navy, a mix of career sailors and wartime volunteers, men from Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. They ranged from 16-year-old NAFI canteen assistant Tommy Brown, 2 grizzled petty officers with 20 years of service. 2 crew members would become central to this story. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, 29, First Lieutenant Executive Officer. Fasson was Petard's Scottish, from a middle-class Edinburgh family. He had joined the Royal Navy in 1932 as a cadet. By 1942, he was an experienced officer with a reputation for personal courage bordering on recklessness. His crew respected him but also worried. About him, he seemed to lack any sense of personal danger. Volunteering for hazardous duties and expecting his body to accomplish whatever his will demanded. He was also intensely curious about how things worked. When Petard had participated in a previous U-boat hunt that resulted in sinking the submarine without capture, Fasson had expressed frustration. We need to board them before they sink. There's intelligence value in what they're carrying: codebooks, machines, documents. We're throwing away opportunities every time we sink them without searching them first. Able seaman Colin Grazier, 22, torpedo rating. Grazier was from Tamworth, Staffordshire. Working class background, left school at 14 to work in coal mines. Joined the Royal Navy in 1940 seeking adventure and regular pay. He was physically strong, mechanically inclined, and had developed a close friendship with Lieutenant Fasson despite the rank difference. Grazier had trained on submarine operations during basic training and understood U-boat layouts, the location of control rooms, radio equipment, captain's quarters, document storage. That knowledge would prove critical. NAAFI, canteen assistant, Tommy Brown, 16. Tommy was officially recorded as 18 on his enlistment papers, but everyone knew he was younger. In wartime, the Royal Navy didn't look too closely at birth certificates if a boy seemed physically mature enough for service. Tommy was tall for his age, strong, and eager to serve. He worked in Petard's canteen, serving meals, managing supplies, cleaning spaces. It wasn't glamorous work, but Tommy approached it with enthusiasm. He idolized the officers and senior ratings, especially Lieutenant Fasten, and desperately wanted to prove himself worthy of their respect. One detail would become critically important. Tommy couldn't swim. He had grown up far from water and had never learned. When asked about this during his enlistment medical examination, he had lied, claiming swimming competency. The examining doctor, overwhelmed with wartime enlistment processing, hadn't verified the claim. Part 3. The hunt begins October 30th, 1942, 1732, 2300 hours. The convoy that Petard was escorting 14 merchant ships, carrying supplies from Alexandria to Malta, had been under intermittent air attack all day. Italian bombers from Crete had made 3 runs, all turned back by the escort's anti-aircraft fire and covering Spitfires from Malta. No ships had been hit, but Thornton was increasingly worried about submarine threats. Intelligence reports indicated at least 2 German U-boats were operating in this area. Conditions were ideal for submarine attacks. MoonlessNight.com sees the convoy proceeding at predictable speed on a known route. At 20:30 hours, Petard's sonar operator reported a possible contact, possible underwater sound, bearing 045, range approximately 2,000 yards. Thornton immediately altered course toward the contact, increasing speed. The other escorts destroyers, HMS Hero and HMS Ulverton, plus several corvettes maintained their convoy screening positions while Petard investigated. The contact was elusive. It appeared and disappeared on sonar, moving slowly, potentially a submarine attempting to position itself for an attack. Thornton tracked it for 90 minutes, maintaining contact, but unable to get close enough for a depth charge attack. At 2147 hours, the contact suddenly sharpened. Definite submarine contact, the sonar operator reported, bearing 042, range 1400 yards, moving left to right. Torpedo warning, someone shouted simultaneously. The lookouts had spotted the distinctive tracks of 2 torpedoes heading toward Petard, launched from the submarine they'd been tracking. Thornton reacted instantly. Hard starboard, full ahead. Petard turned sharply, her engines straining to maximum power. The torpedoes passed down her port side with meters to spare close enough that crew on deck could see them clearly in the disturbed water. That submarine just made a mistake, Thornton said grimly. Firing torpedoes had revealed the U-boat's exact position, all ahead, full, prepared depth charge pattern. What Kapitänleutnant von Tiesenhausen had intended as a killing blow had instead given away U-559's position, and now 3 Royal Navy destroyers were converging on his location with lethal intent. Part 4. The depth charge. Attack, October 30th, 2200 to 2400 hours. The next 2 hours were a textbook anti-submarine hunt. Petard Hero and Dulverton coordinated their attacks, using sonar to track the submerged U-boat and executing depth charge patterns designed to force it deeper and destroy it through sustained pressure. Modern anti-submarine warfare used sophisticated tactics. Phase 1. Establish contact. Multiple destroyers would approach from different directions, using sonar to triangulate the submarine's position. The submarine's attempts to evade would be detected by the multiple sonar sets, allowing precise position tracking. Phase 2. Saturate the area. The destroyers would execute coordinated depth charge patterns. Multiple charges set to detonate at different depths, creating overlapping pressure waves that would damage the submarine's hull even without direct hits. Phase 3. Maintain pressure. That attack would continue for hours if necessary, preventing the submarine from surfacing or escaping, gradually depleting its batteries and crushing the crew's morale. Inside U-559, the situation was becoming desperate. Von Tiesenhausen took his boat, deep approaching 200 meters, near the submarine's maximum safe depth. The depth charges exploded around them with terrifying sound. Massive concussive shocks that made the entire hull ring like a bell, shook loose equipment, fractured gauges, caused leaks in pipes and fittings. Damage report. Von Tiesenhausen called after a particularly close detonation. Electrical damage to starboard motor. Bow planes responding sluggishly. Multiple small leaks in the forward compartment. Depth gauge in after torpedo room is broken. His executive officer reported. The most concerning news came from the chief engineer. Batteries are at 30%. If we don't surface soon to recharge, we'll be running on minimal power within 2 hours. But surfacing was suicide. 3 destroyers were waiting above, tracking their every move. If U-559 surfaced, she'd be illuminated by searchlights and destroyed by gunfire within minutes. Von Tiesenhausen faced an impossible choice: stay submerged until the batteries died and the boat sank uncontrollably, or surface into a gauntlet of enemy fire. At 2337 hours, another pattern of depth charges detonated, close aboard, so close that the concussion knocked crew members off their feet, shattered light bulbs, and caused a major leak in the engine room. We're taking water faster than the pumps can handle, the chief engineer reported. Recommend immediate surface and abandon ship. Von Tiesenhausen made the decision. Blow all ballast tanks. Emergency surface. All crew prepare to abandon ship. Part 5. The race against time. October 31st, 1942, 00:01, 2 hours. U-559 burst through the surface like a breaching whale, seawater cascading off her conning tower, her diesels coughing and failing to start, her crew scrambling up through the hatches into the Mediterranean night. Petard's searchlights caught her immediately. The destroyer was less than 800 yards away, point-blank range for naval combat, illuminating target. The searchlight operator called, "All guns, open fire." Thornton ordered Petard's 4.7-inch main guns and 40mm anti-aircraft weapons opened fire simultaneously, tracers arcing across the water, shells screaming toward the surfaced submarine. But Thornton wasn't trying to sink U-559, not yet. His orders were to capture if possible, destroy only if necessary. The gunfire was designed to suppress the U-boat's deck guns and panic the crew into abandoning ship quickly, before they could scuttle their vessel. It worked. German sailors poured out of U-559's hatches, many diving directly into the water, swimming away from their sinking submarine, desperately trying to reach the life rafts that Petard and Hero were deploying. Von Tiesenhausen was one of the last to leave the conning tower, taking a final look at his command before jumping. As he hit the water, he could hear the distinctive sound of scuttling charges detonating deep in U-559's hull. Demolition explosives designed to flood the submarine and send it to the bottom before the enemy could board it. But the scuttling charges weren't working properly, damaged by depth charge concussions. The flooding was slower than intended. U-559 was sinking, but gradually her bow settling lower in the water, her stern rising slowly, air escaping from the hatch in great bubbling rushes. On Petard's deck, Lieutenant Fassen watched the submarine settling and made an instant decision. "Grazier, Brown, with me. We're boarding her." "Sir," one of the other officers protested, "she's sinking. The scuttling charges haven't fully detonated yet. We have time. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. We're going aboard." Fassen was already moving, running to Petard's railing, preparing to dive into the dark water. Grazier followed immediately. Tommy Brown hesitated for just a second. He couldn't swim. The submarine was sinking. This was insane, then followed anyway, because Lieutenant Fassen was going and Tommy wasn't going to let him go alone. 3 sailors dove into the Mediterranean night, swimming toward a submarine that could plunge to the bottom at any moment, with no clear idea what they were looking for, but absolute determination to find it. Part 6. Inside the dying submarine. October 31st, 1942, 00:01, 8:00:29 hours. The swim to U-559 took less than 2 minutes. Fassen reached the submarine first, pulling himself up onto the slippery, angled deck, moving quickly toward the conning tower. Grazier and Tommy Brown followed, struggling up onto the tilting hull. Water was already lapping at the base of the conning tower. U-559's bow was completely submerged. Her stern rose at perhaps a 30-degree angle, pointing toward the night sky. She could plunge at any second. Down the hatch, Fassen called. Quickly, they descended into darkness. The emergency lighting inside U-559 was failing, just a few dim bulbs. providing barely enough illumination to see. Water was ankle-deep in the control room and rising perceptibly. The angle of the deck made movement difficult. Everything was tilted, slippery, disorienting. Fasten moved forward, toward the captain's quarters. He had studied U-boat layouts during officer training and knew generally where important materials would be stored. The radio room and captain's safe, that's what we need. Grazier followed, while Tommy Brown remained near the conning tower hatch. The escape route. The captain's quarters were partially flooded, but accessible. Fasten found the safe, a small metal locker bolted to the bulkhead. It was locked. Grazier, wrench or crowbar, anything to force this open. They searched frantically, found a heavy wrench in the control room, brought it back. Together, they pried at the safe's locking mechanism. The lock broke after 30 seconds of effort. Inside, documents.fason grabbed everything. Codebooks, key settings, tables, operational orders, maps, message logs. He couldn't read German, had no idea what was important and what wasn't. He grabbed it all. Brown, he called up the hatch. Catch. Tommy Brown, waiting at the base of the conning tower, caught the first bundle of documents as Fasten threw them up. Waterproof bags, folders, loose papers, everything came flying up through the hatch, and Tommy caught them and passed them up to sailors on Petard's Weir, which had rowed over to assist. The water inside U-559 was now knee-deep and rising faster. The submarine's angle had increased perhaps 40 degrees now, the stern pointing almost straight up. "Sir," Tommy called down, "she's going. You need to come out now. More materials." Fasten called back. He had found the radio room, was pulling out equipment, cipher machines, more documents. "Keep catching." 2 Enigma rotors came flying up through the hatch. Critical components of the cipher machine, more codebook, a complete set of bigram tables, the mathematical keys to the shark. Cipher. Grazier was now physically pulling Fasten toward the hatch. "Sir, we have to leave." The waters, the submarine lurched, a horrible groaning sound of metal under stress. The bow compartments were flooding completely. The stern was about to follow. "Out, both of you, out," Fasten ordered. Grazier started up the ladder to the conning tower hatch. Tommy Brown was still at the top, reaching down to help. Then U-559 plunged, not gradually, suddenly. The compressed air that had been keeping her afloat escaped in one massive bubble. The water pressure overwhelmed the remaining watertight integrity, and 800 tons of submarine dropped toward the Mediterranean floor like a stone. Tommy Brown, at the top of the hatch, felt the deck drop beneath him. He jumped, pushing away from the sinking submarine, hitting the water 10 feet below. He couldn't swim, but survival instinct took over. He thrashed, managed to stay afloat, was pulled aboard the Weir by sailors who grabbed his arms and hauled him bodily out of the water. Grazier, halfway up the hatch ladder, was sucked down with the submarine. He never reached the surface. Fasten, still in the control room, had no chance. U-559 took him to the bottom in seconds. The submarine sank in more than 3,000 feet of water. At that depth, the pressure hull imploded, crushing everything inside instantly. Lieutenant Anthony Fasten and able seaman Colin Grazier died together, entombed in the submarine they had boarded to steal its secrets. Part 7. The hull. October 31st, 1942:00:04 5 hours. Aboard HMS Petard. Tommy Brown was wrapped in blankets, shaking from cold and shock, clutching the documents he had caught as Fasten threw them up through the hatch. Around him, sailors were spreading out the materials on Petard's deck under carefully shielded lights, trying to assess what had been recovered. Commander Thornton examined the documents with growing excitement. He couldn't read German and couldn't evaluate the technical significance of the cipher materials, but he recognized codebooks, encryption tables, and what appeared to be message logs. "Get these secured immediately," he ordered. "Waterproof containers, sealed, locked in my safe, and get a message to the Admiralty. Have captured cryptographic materials from U-559. Crew lost to killed boarding sinking submarine. Request immediate instructions for handling captured materials." The reply came 3 hours later. Transmitted with highest priority classification. Captured materials of utmost importance. Maintain absolute security. Proceed immediately to port said. Cryptographic specialists will meet you there. Under no circumstances discuss capture or materials with anyone. Classification, ultra secret. The materials Tommy Brown had caught included the weather short signal codebook, Wetterkush, Lascelles, used to encode weather reports before encrypting them with Enigma. This provided cribs known plaintext that could be used to attack the cipher. Bigram tables, mathematical lookup tables used in the Pterota, Enigma's encryption process. With these tables, Bletchley Park could significantly reduce the number of possible settings that needed to be tested. Short signal codebook, Kursignal heft, used for common operational messages, providing more cribs for attacking the cipher. To spare Enigma rotors, physical components of the cipher machine, allowing British engineers to understand the wiring patterns of the 4-rotor variant. Recent message logs showing actual encrypted messages alongside their decrypted, providing perfect cribs for training the bombs. Individually, none of these materials would break the Shark cipher, but together, they provided exactly what Bletchley Park needed to crack the 4-rotor naval Enigma. Part 8. Breakthrough at Bletchley Park, December 1942. Hut 8. Bletchley Park. The materials from U-559 arrived at Bletchley Park on November 5, 1942. Rushed from Port Said by air courier under maximum security. Joan Clark and Alan Turing examined them with intense excitement. "This is it," Turing said quietly. "This is what we needed." The weather code book alone was extraordinarily valuable. German U-boats transmitted weather reports every day using a standard format: wind speed and direction, barometric pressure, air temperature, sea state, visibility. These reports were encoded using the weather codebook, then encrypted using Enigma. But because weather reports followed standard formats and used limited vocabulary, they provided perfect cribs for attacking the cipher. If Bletchley Park knew the weather in a particular area, they could predict what the encrypted message should say, providing the known plaintext attack vectors that the bombs needed. The bigram tables were even more valuable. The 4-rotor Enigma used these tables as part of its encryption process. Without the tables, Bletchley Park would have to determine their contents through cryptanalysis, a process that could take months. With the captured tables, they could skip that entire step. Joan Clark immediately began developing a new attack methodology. Step 1. Intercept. German naval weather reports. Step 2. Used the weather codebook to predict the message content. Step 3. Use the predicted content as a crib against the Enigma encryption. Step 4. Run bomb tests using the crib and the captured bigram tables. Step 5. Identify the daily key settings. 6. Decrypt all other messages sent that day using those settings. The first test came on December 13, 1942. They intercepted a weather report from a U-boat operating in the North Atlantic, used the weather codebook to predict the message content, and ran the bomb attack using the new methodology. After 3 hours, the bomb stopped. It had found the daily key settings. Joan Clark fed the settings into a replica Enigma machine, captured earlier from U-110, and decrypted the message. Perfect German plaintext emerged the weather report from U-221, reporting conditions in grid square B 3452. "It works," Joan said quietly. "We're back inside Shark." Over the next 3 weeks, Hut 8 refined the methodology, trained additional personnel, and began systematically decrypting German naval Enigma traffic. By January 1943, they were reading U-boat communications almost in real time. Blackout was over. Part 9. The strategic impact. January-December 1943. The impact of regaining access to German naval communications was immediate and devastating for the U fleet. January 1943. Allied ship losses dropped to 37 ships, 203128 tons, a 74% reduction from June 1942 levels. February 1943, 63 ships, sunk 359,328 tons, still significant, but well below 1942 levels. March 1943, 108 ships, sunk 627,377 tons, the last major U-boat success. This was the turning point. After March 1943, Allied losses declined precipitously, while U-boat losses soared. April 1943, 56 ships sunk, 327,943 tons. May 1,943, 50 ships sunk, 264,852 tons. June 1,943, 28 ships sunk, 123,825 tons. By summer 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. U-boats were being sunk faster than Germany could build them. Crew morale collapsed. Experienced commanders were killed and replaced by inexperienced officers who made tactical mistakes. The wolf packs that had terrorized the Atlantic were hunted to near extinction. Admiral Karl Dönitz ordered a tactical assessment in August 1943. His staff's analysis, captured after the war, attributed Allied success to improved radar technology, long-range patrol aircraft with enhanced detection equipment, better convoy tactics and escort coordination, superior anti-submarine, Allied shipbuilding production. Nowhere in the German analysis was there any mention of compromised communications. They never suspected that every message they transmitted was being read by British intelligence within hours, that every U-boat position was known, that every operational order was intercepted, that their entire Atlantic campaign was an open book to the enemy. The cost of that blind spot: 1,943 U-boat losses, January-April 56, boats sunk May-August, 123 boats sunk September-December, 67 boats sunk total, 246. U-boats destroyed in 1943, at an average crew complement of 48 men per boat. That represented approximately 11,808 German submariners killed or captured in 1943 alone, and it all traced back to 3 sailors boarding a sinking submarine on a dark October night in 1942. Part 10. The Human Cost. November 2nd, 1942. Tamworth, Staffordshire. Alice Grazier opened the door to find a Royal Navy chaplain and a lieutenant commander in full uniform standing on her doorstep. She knew immediately what they had come to tell her. "Mrs. Grazier, I regret to inform you that your son, able seaman Colin Grazier, was killed in action on October 31st while serving aboard HMS Petard in the Mediterranean." The official account was carefully sanitized. Grazier had died during anti-submarine operations. No mention of boarding a sinking submarine. No explanation of what he had been trying to accomplish. No hint that his death had any significance beyond the tragedy that every wartime family faced. The truth was classified. The captured materials from U-559 were so sensitive that even the families of the men who had died obtaining them couldn't be told what their sacrifice had accomplished. Alice Grazier was told her son died bravely in service to his country. She was not told that his courage had helped break the German naval cipher. She was not told that the materials he helped capture would contribute to sinking hundreds of U-boats. She was not told that his death would help save thousands of Allied sailors over the next 2 years. She couldn't be told, because telling her might reveal the intelligence breakthrough to German spies or sympathizers. Security required that Colin Grazier's achievement remain secret, perhaps forever. Lieutenant Fasten's family received a similar notification. His widow was told he had died during anti-submarine operations. His 2 young daughters would grow up knowing only that their father had been killed in the war, not understanding that his final act of courage had contributed to winning it. Tommy Brown survived the war. He was awarded the George Medal for his role in the U-559, boarding one of Britain's highest civilian decorations for gallantry. The citation was deliberately vague: for courage in boarding a sinking enemy submarine and recovering valuable materials. But Tommy was only 16. Officially too young to serve in combat operations. When his true age was discovered, he was quietly discharged from the Royal Navy in 1943 and sent home. He tried to re-enlist under a different name but was rejected. In 1945, just months before the war ended, Tommy Brown died in a house fire in his hometown of North Shields. He was 19 years old. He saved his 2-year-old sister from the burning house, then went back inside to rescue others. He never came out. The George Medal he earned for boarding U-559 was presented posthumously, alongside the medals awarded for his final act of heroism. Part 11. The recognition, delayed 1980s-2000s, for 40 years after the war. The story of U-559's capture remained classified. The families of Fasten and Grazier knew only the sanitized official version. The strategic significance of the captured materials remained secret. Then, in the 1970s and 1980s, the British government began declassifying wartime intelligence operations. The story of Bletchley Park gradually emerged. Books were published about Enigma, about Alan Turing, about the codebreakers' achievements. But the physical capture operations, the dangerous boarding actions, the courage required to swim to sinking submarines and steal documents remained less unknown. Aspects of the intelligence war. In 2000, a campaign began to properly recognize Fasson and Grazia's sacrifice. Naval historians, cryptography experts, and family members argued that the two sailors deserved more than generic killed-in-action notices. They deserved recognition for specific acts of extraordinary courage that had contributed to winning the Battle of the Atlantic. The campaign succeeded. In October 2000, exactly 58 years after U-559's capture, a memorial was dedicated at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, honoring Fasson, Grazia, and Brown. The memorial inscription reads, Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, GC and able seaman, Colin Grazia, GC of HMS Petard died on the 30th of October, 1942 whilst recovering vital code, breaking material from the sinking German submarine U-559 in the Mediterranean. CNAAFI canteen assistant Tommy Brown GC survived this action, but died aged 19 in 1945. Their bravery helped to shorten the Second World War and saved countless lives. G.C. George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for gallantry, awarded posthumously in 2015 after a long campaign to properly recognize their achievement. The citation for the George Cross Award stated, through their actions in boarding a sinking enemy submarine under fire, recovering cryptographic materials of immense strategic value, Lieutenant Fasson and able seaman Grazia displayed courage of the highest order. They knowingly risked their lives and ultimately gave them to obtain materials that enabled British intelligence to decrypt German naval communications, contributing decisively to Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. Their selfless gallantry exemplifies the finest traditions of the Royal Navy. Colin Grazia's nephew, Phil Grazia, accepted the posthumous George Cross on behalf of his uncle's family. Speaking at the ceremony, he said, "For 70 years, our family knew only that Colin had died in action. We knew he was brave, but we didn't know what he had accomplished. Learning the truth, that his courage helped break the German codes, that he died obtaining materials that would save thousands of Allied sailors, gives profound meaning to his sacrifice. He was 22 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. But in that moment, boarding that sinking submarine, he chose duty over survival. That's the definition of heroism." Part 12. The German Perspective, 1960s, 1980s, post-war Germany. Kapitänleutnant Hans Dudrich von Tiesenhausen survived the war. He was pulled from the Mediterranean by HMS Petard on October 31, 1942, along with 30 other members of U-559's crew. He spent the remainder of the war in British prisoner of war camps. In the 1970s, when the Enigma story became public, von Tiesenhausen gave interviews to German naval historians. His reactions were complex, a mixture of professional respect for British intelligence operations and personal bitterness at the deception that had cost so many U-boat crews their lives. "When I learned that the British had captured materials from U-559 and used them to break our naval cipher, my first reaction was anger," von Tiesenhausen said in a 1979 interview. "We believed Enigma was unbreakable. We trusted our communications completely. That trust killed thousands of submariners." He was asked whether he felt the British had acted improperly by boarding U-559 while she was sinking. "No," he said firmly. "What Lieutenant Fasson and Seaman Grazia did was extraordinarily brave. They boarded a sinking submarine, knowing it could plunge at any moment. They died doing it. As a naval officer, I respect that courage even though it was directed against my own side. War is war. They saw an opportunity to obtain valuable intelligence, and they took it at the risk of their own lives. That's what warriors do." But he was bitter about the strategic consequences. "If our command had known the British were reading our messages, we would have changed procedures, developed new ciphers, perhaps won the Battle of the Atlantic, but we never suspected. We had absolute confidence in Enigma's security, confidence based on mathematical analysis that seemed sound, but missed the crucial point. The British weren't breaking the cipher through pure mathematics alone. They were using captured materials, cribs, and computing machines we didn't know existed. Our mathematical certainty was our greatest vulnerability." Von Tiesenhausen lived until 2000, long enough to see Fasson and Grazia properly honored. When asked if he planned to attend the memorial dedication, he declined. "I respect their courage, but attending a ceremony celebrating the intelligence coup that doomed my comrades would feel like a betrayal. I honor their bravery privately, but I cannot publicly celebrate what resulted from it. Perhaps that's a contradiction. But war creates contradictions that never fully resolve. Even 60 years later. Part 13. The Captured Machine, 1942 to 1945. Bletchley Park. The Enigma components recovered from U-559, 2 spare rotors, and various mechanical parts joined. A growing collection of captured German cipher equipment at Bletchley Park. By late 1942, British intelligence had accumulated 3 complete 3-rotor Enigma machines from U-110. Captured May 1941 various 4-rotor Enigma components from U-559 and other sources, numerous codebooks, key settings, tables, and operational manuals captured German encryption procedures and protocols. But possessing the machines and materials was only part of the solution. The real challenge was the industrial-scale cryptanalysis required to decrypt the sheer volume of German naval traffic. By 1943, Bletchley Park operated more than 200 bomb machines, electromechanical computers designed specifically to attack Enigma. These machines, working 24 hours a day, tested millions of possible cipher settings, using cribs derived from the captured codebooks to narrow down the search space. The process worked like this: 0600 hours. British listening stations intercept German naval messages transmitted during the night. 0800 hours. Messages arrive at Bletchley Park for processing. 0830 hours. Cryptanalysts identify probable cribs using weather codebooks and standard message formats. 0900 hours. Bomb runs begin testing possible settings against the cribs. 1200 hours. Daily cipher settings identified. 1300 hours. All intercepted messages decrypted using the daily settings. 1400 hours. Decrypted intelligence distributed to operational commands on a good day. Bletchley Park could be reading German U-boat messages within 6 to 8 hours of transmission, fast enough for the intelligence to be actionable, allowing the Admiralty to route convoys around U-boat positions or vector anti-submarine forces to intercept them. The German Navy transmitted approximately 1,000 to 2,000 Enigma encrypted messages per day. Bletchley Park was decrypting 60 to 80% of them by mid-1943. Every single decrypted message existed because 3 sailors had boarded a sinking submarine in October 1942 and stolen the materials that made the decryption possible. Part 14. The Ripple Effect, 1943 to 1944. Atlantic Theatre. The intelligence derived from decrypted German naval communications had cascading effects throughout the Atlantic War. Convoy routing. The Admiralty's submarine tracking room used decrypted U-boat position reports to route convoys around patrol lines between January and December 1943. This routing prevented an estimated 300 to 400 merchant ship sinkings. Operations. Allied anti-submarine forces used decrypted operational orders to position themselves for intercepts. When U-boats proceeded to assigned patrol areas, they found Allied destroyers and escort carriers waiting. Between May and December 1943, hunter-killer groups sank 97 U-boats, most located using intelligence from decrypted communications. Supply submarine interdiction. German supply submarines, Milchkuh boats, were systematically hunted using decrypted rendezvous coordinates. Between April and August 1943, Allied forces destroyed 7 of the 10 supply submarines operating in the Atlantic, crippling the U-boat fleet's logistics. Mine-laying operations. Decrypted messages revealed German plans to lay minefields in Allied convoy routes. Mine-clearing operations were conducted preemptively, preventing merchant ship losses. Strategic planning. Intelligence about U-boat construction, crew training, operational readiness, and strategic priorities allowed Allied command to understand German submarine warfare capabilities and limitations. This intelligence shaped Allied strategy, including the decision to prioritize anti-submarine warfare resources in 1943. The cumulative effect was devastating for Germany. The U-boat fleet that had nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic in 1942 was reduced to ineffectiveness by late 1943. U-boat operational statistics, 1942. Before U-559 materials, U-boat operational 212. Average Allied ships sunk, 1,160. 6.2 million tons U-boats lost, 871943. After U-559 materials, Operational 240 average Allied ships. Sunk 463 2.4 million tons U-boat. Lost 246 despite having more submarines. Operational in 1943. Germany sank far fewer Allied ships and lost nearly 3 times as many U-boats. The difference was intelligence specifically. The intelligence enabled by the materials captured from U-559. Part 15. The ethical dimension post-war analysis. The capture of U-559 and the subsequent decryption of German naval communications raised profound ethical questions that military historians and philosophers continue to debate. Was it ethical to allow U-boat crews to die based on intelligence they had no ability to defend against? The Allied perspective, intelligence warfare is legitimate warfare. Using superior intelligence to gain military advantage is no different morally than using superior weapons or tactics. German U-boats were attempting to starve Britain into submission by sinking merchant ships and killing Allied sailors. Using intelligence to defeat that campaign saved Allied lives and shortened the war. The critical perspective: there's an ethical distinction between defeating an enemy in battle and defeating them through deception they cannot detect or defend against. German submariners believed their communications were secure and trusted their command's intelligence. That trust was exploited. Some ethicists argue that creating a situation where the enemy operates under false assumptions crosses moral boundaries. Did Fasson and Grazier know what they were dying for? This question haunted many who studied the U-559 capture. The 2 sailors who died boarding the submarine had no specific knowledge of what materials might be aboard, or what their significance would be. They were following general orders that emphasized capturing enemy submarines intact when possible. Lieutenant Fasson understood generally that cryptographic materials were valuable, but he couldn't have known that the specific codebooks in U-559's safe would enable breaking the 4-rotor naval Enigma. He died on a calculated risk that the materials might be valuable, not certain knowledge that they were essential. Does that matter ethically? Some argue it makes their sacrifice even more profound. They died on the possibility that what they were doing might matter, which requires greater courage than dying for certain strategic gain. Should the operation have been attempted at all? The risk assessment was stark. 3 sailors' lives against possible intelligence gain of unknown value. Commander Thornton made the decision to allow the boarding in seconds, without time for careful analysis. Both war analysis suggests Thornton made the correct decision strategically. The materials captured from U-559 contributed to winning the Battle of the Atlantic, which was essential to Allied victory. Fasson and Grazier's deaths purchased strategic intelligence that saved thousands of lives. But that's hindsight. In the moment, Thornton couldn't know the boarding would succeed, couldn't know what materials existed aboard U-559, couldn't predict their strategic value. He gambled 3 lives on possibility and won the gamble. Strategically, even though 2 of the gamblers died. The family's perspective: when the Grazier and Fasson families finally learned the full story decades after the war, their reactions were mixed. Pride in their loved ones' courage was complicated by the knowledge that the achievement remained classified for so long, that the sacrifice went publicly unrecognized for decades, that even they couldn't be told what their husbands and sons had died accomplishing. Colin Grazier's mother, Alice, died in 1968 without ever knowing that her son's death had contributed to breaking Enigma. She believed only the sanitized official account, that he had died during routine anti-submarine operations. Was that justified? Security officials argued that revealing the truth might compromise ongoing intelligence operations, might indicate to potential adversaries that Britain possessed advanced cryptanalytic capabilities, might endanger similar operations in future conflicts, but it meant that Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in service, were denied even the consolation of knowing that the sacrifice had mattered. Strategically, that wound took decades to heal. Part 16. The Technology Race, 1942 to 1945. The evolution of naval Enigma. The capture of materials from U-559 didn't permanently solve the Enigma problem. German engineers continued developing new security measures, and Bletchley Park engaged in a constant technological race to maintain decryption capabilities. December 1942, Bletchley Park breaks into 4-rotor naval Enigma using U-559 materials. March 1943, Germany introduces new codebook procedures, temporarily disrupting Bletchley Park adapts within 3 weeks. July 1943, Germany implements additional rotor settings changes. Decryption continues but requires more bomb. Time to crack daily settings. October 1943, Germany begins suspecting that convoy routing is too effective to be coincidence. Some officers privately suggest communications might be compromised. These suggestions are officially dismissed. Enigma's mathematical security is considered absolute, but increased security procedures are implemented. February 1944, Germany introduces Enigma modifications for U-boats operating in specific theaters. Bletchley Park must develop new attack methods for each variant. June 1944, after D-Day, Germany becomes increasingly desperate. Some U-boats are ordered to break radio silence less frequently, reducing the amount of traffic available for cryptanalysis. January 1945, with the war obviously lost, Germany reduces U-boat operations in the Atlantic. Enigma traffic drops precipitously. Bletchley Park's intelligence value shifts toward monitoring German tactical communications in other theaters. Throughout this period, the fundamental breakthrough enabled by U-559's captured materials remained valid. The weather codebook provided cribs, the diagram tables provided mathematical shortcuts. The operational procedures revealed in captured documents allowed Bletchley Park to predict message formats and content, but maintaining the decryption capability required constant adaptation. Massive computational resources, the bomb machines, thousands of personnel working in shifts, and perfect operational security to ensure Germany never discovered that Enigma was compromised. The technological and organizational achievement was staggering, and it began with 3 sailors swimming to a sinking submarine on a dark October night. Conclusion: the traitor inside the machine. Story of U-559 reveals something fundamental about modern warfare: that courage and intelligence are inseparable, that physical bravery enables intellectual achievement, that the most consequential battles are sometimes fought, not with weapons but with stolen documents and mathematical calculations. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier died in darkness, inside a sinking submarine, passing documents up through a hatch to a 16-year-old who couldn't swim. They never knew what they were dying for. They couldn't read German, couldn't evaluate the cryptographic significance of what they were stealing, had no idea that the codebooks and cipher materials they grabbed would unlock German naval communications for the remainder of the war. They just knew it might matter, and that possibility was worth their lives. The documents they captured became a traitor inside the machine, enabling Bletchley Park to read German naval communications, to predict U-boat movements, to route convoys around patrol lines, to vector hunter-killer groups, to intercept submarines, to strangle Germany's Atlantic campaign through intelligence superiority. The numbers tell the story: 2,000 plus German submariners killed in operations compromised by intelligence derived from U-559 materials. 400 plus Allied merchant ships saved through convoy routing based on decrypted U-boat positions. 9/7 U-boats sunk by hunter-killer groups positioned using decrypted operational orders. Countless thousands of Allied sailors, merchant mariners, and civilians whose lives were saved because supply convoys reached Britain safely. All of this traced back to those captured documents. The traitor inside the machine wasn't a person. It was mathematics. It was the weather codebook that provided cribs. It was the diagram tables that enabled bomb attacks. It was the operational procedures that allowed Bletchley Park to predict message formats. It was the captured Enigma components that revealed the rotor machine's wiring. But none of those materials would have been captured without physical courage, the courage to swim to a sinking submarine, to climb down into darkness and rising water, to frantically search for documents while knowing the boat could plunge at any second, to keep passing materials up through the hatch even as the submarine groaned and settled and prepared to take its final dive to the Mediterranean floor. 2 men died for those documents. A third man, a boy, really, only 16 years old, who couldn't even swim, survived to catch them, survived to pass them to the waiting whaleboat, survived to be wrapped in blankets while Petard's crew secured the captured materials in the captain's safe. Tommy Brown lived 3 more years, long enough to be awarded the George Medal, long enough to be discharged when his true age was discovered, long enough to save his sister from a burning house in 1945 before dying in the flames, himself at age 19. 3 young men, all dead before age 30. all heroes whose stories remained classified for decades, all essential to winning the Battle of the Atlantic and, thereby, World War II itself. The final irony: the Germans never knew. Admiral Dönitz died in 1980, believing that Enigma had remained secure throughout the war. Hundreds of U-boat veterans lived out their lives believing they had been defeated by superior Allied technology and tactics, never knowing that every message they transmitted was read by British intelligence, that every operational order was intercepted, that their entire campaign was an open book to the enemy. The traitor inside the machine was invisible, because it wasn't human. It was mathematics enabled by physical courage. It was intelligence derived from documents stolen at the cost of lives. It was a secret so well kept that the enemy never suspected it existed. Even decades after the war ended, from John Clarke's 1996 memoir, people often ask which intelligence breakthrough was most important to winning the war. I always answer, U-559, not because of any single decrypt, but because of what those captured materials enabled. They allowed us to read German naval communications throughout 1943 and 1944, the critical years when the Battle of the Atlantic hung in the balance. Without those materials, we might never have broken the four-rotor naval Enigma, and without reading those communications, we might have lost the Atlantic War. 2 sailors died, obtaining those materials. They never knew what they were dying for. They just knew it might matter. That faith, that willingness to give everything on the possibility that it might make a difference represents the finest kind of courage. Lieutenant Fassen and able seaman Grazier deserved every honor they eventually received, but they deserved it decades earlier, when their families were still alive, to know that the sacrifice had mattered. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief, Western Approaches, 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by sailors at sea fighting U-boats, by merchant mariners continuing to sail despite horrific losses, by shipyard workers building vessels faster than the enemy could sink them, and by cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park reading German communications. But the turning point, moment when we gained the intelligence advantage, that allowed everything else to succeed, came when 3 sailors boarded a sinking submarine and stole the materials that broke Enigma. Everything else followed from that act of courage. Hans Dietrich von Tiesenhausen, final interview. 1999, I commanded U-559 for 9 months. I trusted my crew, my equipment, my tactics, and my communications. That trust in communications was misplaced. The British were reading everything we transmitted, knew where we were, knew what we were doing, knew how to defeat us. We never suspected because we believed Enigma was mathematically unbreakable. I respect Lieutenant Fassen and Seaman Grazier for their courage. I respect the British cryptanalysts for their brilliance. I respect even the deception that cost so many of my comrades their lives, because it was legitimate warfare. But I will never forgive the false certainty our command gave us, the absolute confidence in Enigma's security that prevented us from even considering that our communications might be compromised. That certainty killed thousands of submariners who died following orders and positions that were known to the enemy. That certainty was our real enemy. The British merely exploited it. Epilogue. The machine in the museum today. Several captured Enigma machines sit in museums: the Imperial War Museum in London, the National Cryptologic Museum in Maryland, Bletchley Park itself. Visitors can see the rotors, the plug board, the keyboard, the lamp. They can understand generally how the machine worked, how it encrypted messages, why it seemed unbreakable. What they can't see, what's invisible in the display cases, is the blood that made breaking Enigma possible. The physical courage that captured the materials, the 2 men who died in a sinking submarine passing documents up through a hatch, the 16-year-old boy who caught them and lived to tell the story, only to die in a house fire 3 years later. The traitor inside the machine wasn't the machine itself. It was the captured codebooks, the stolen documents, the materials obtained at the cost of lives. It was mathematics enabled by courage. It was intelligence built on sacrifice. And it won the Battle of the Atlantic before most U-boat commanders even knew they were in a battle they couldn't win.